We interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Show, starring Courage, the Cowardly Dog. Abandoned as a pup, he was found by Muriel, who lives in the middle of nowhere with her husband, Eustace Bag. But creepy stuff happens in nowhere. It's up to Courage to save his new home.
Stupid dog! You made me look bad!
Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing Courage, the Cowardly Dog, created by John R. Dilworth. The series premiered on Cartoon Network on November 12th, 1999. It ran for 4 seasons with a total of 52 episodes, the last of which aired on November 22nd, 2002. So really, that's kind of a fairly short run when you think about it, just a few years, but this is such a fantastic show. I haven't seen it in a long time, so revisiting it as an adult, oh my god, I really, really love it. And I loved it so much as a kid. My siblings and I really, really loved it. My brother in particular especially loved this show. And what's hilarious is that whenever it was on, we would never say Courage. It was always, Cuttage. We would always say Cuttage, as, you know, with Muriel, with her Scottish accent. So for us, it was always, oh my gosh, it was always us saying, we're watching Cuttage. Like, Cuttage, the Cowardly Dog is on. But, oh my goodness. And of course, really the 3 main characters of the series, Courage, voiced by Marty Grabstein, Muriel, voiced by Thea White, and Eustace, voiced by Lionel Wilson in seasons 1 to 3, and Arthur Anderson in seasons 3 to 4. And Courage is such an amazing character, and watching this now, I watched so many episodes. Courage, I mean, to me, like, there's no flaws with that character. He is the absolute embodiment of everything to strive for, just that loyalty and bravery and facing his fears, and of course that his main motivation is to protect his owners, in particular Muriel, just that unconditional love for Muriel. That's just so sweet, and I really love that. And then of course Muriel too, how she's just basically this embodiment of kindness and so warm and friendly and sweet. And then of course that stark contrast with Eustace, who is just an absolute scumbag. He's, oh my god. I just hate, obviously, that he's just so abusive towards Courage because he is jealous of him, and it's just so mean. He always calls him stupid dog, and then even that intro with him scaring Courage, it's just terrible. Oh my god. Ugh. That said, I mean, since this is a kid's show, yes, he is grumpy and greedy and unlikable, but there are here and there tiny moments where he is somewhat sympathetic, somewhat of not such a jerk, because I've said this before with storytelling, with screenwriting in particular, that when you have antagonists, that every once in a while you have to have what's called pet the dog moments, ironically, with Courage being a dog, but basically moments that humanize them. So we do see that here and there with Eustace, even though for the most part he's just this embodiment to me of just anger. So you got Courage with loyalty, Eustace with anger, and Muriel with kindness. So there's that balance. So these 3, they are their own little family. And it's cool how we just get the premise in that opening sequence for the show instead of a theme song, just setting up the premise of the show. And this really is just such a creative show, and so obviously creepy, though, with all the villains. Like, definitely some nightmare fuel. Oh my gosh. But I really do love Courage and his just unflinching loyalty and selflessness, and that he'll do absolutely anything to protect Muriel and Eustace. And it's just funny, though, that they live in nowhere, like nowhere, Kansas, literally in the middle of nowhere. That's just great, too. But what's interesting is that I hadn't seen the pilot for the series when the series was picked up. The pilot is called A Chicken from Outer Space, and it was produced in 1995. And it actually was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. And I always say, like, when you watch pilots, and it's cool to see, in particular with animation, it's cool to see, say, different art style or different voice actors before it actually becomes a series. So in this case, with this pilot, which you can find on YouTube, it's different voice actors. It's actually all just one person doing all the voices for this pilot. It was Howard Hoffman. He did the voice of everyone, Courage, Eustace, Muriel, and then you got that evil chicken from outer space. A lot of poultry villains, which is bizarre too. And mostly animals, but of course, plenty of bizarre, strange creatures. And it's interesting too when you watch this now, how, like for me, picking up on all of the parodies and homages to certain classic horror films and just with the horror genre in general. And also plenty of sci-fi in here. But what's great too, though, is that with all the creepy villains and with all that evilness and just all the terrifying encounters for Courage each and every episode, there's a good balance with all of that and with the slapstick humor of this series. So thank goodness for that, because with all the creepiness, you need some of that humor here and there. So that gives it that good balance. And then also with the characters, there are a lot of, with Courage in particular too, and with Eustace, kind of like just the catchphrases, like their go-to phrases. And what's hilarious is that with Eustace, we always loved when he would go like, "What's huh?" You know. Love that. And then with Courage, what's interesting that I didn't notice as a kid, because obviously when you're a kid, you just watch whatever episode is on. You know, back in the day, back in the early 2000s of this show, with like late 90s, early 2000s. But rewatching it now, since what I did actually, I binged all of season 1 and 2, and then just a handful of episodes from 3 and 4. So I want to finish watching all of them at some point, because I don't think I've seen every episode of this series, so that'll be, at some point, I want to finish watching them. But with season 1, something I never noticed was that Courage had much more dialogue in season 1, and then season 2 onward, he only had lines here and there, and when he did speak, it was mostly the same things kind of over and over. In particular, just whenever he says, "The things I do for love," because that's, of course, his main motivation, just despite all of this horrible, horrible stuff that happens, he's got to protect his owners. He does it all out of love. And then always with his frantic things like, "What do I do? What do I do?" And just all of that. And "Muriel, I'll save you." Just all of his super frantic little lines here and there. But it was just strange. And then apparently that was intentional, that the producers had decided after season 1 that they wanted Courage to be more succinct. And I guess with that, then him not really... Because whenever he did speak, though, it wasn't like he was speaking to Muriel and Eustace. He would sometimes speak to the villain, like the episodic villain. But for the most part, when he was talking, it was him talking to the audience. Like, just more insight into his thoughts that we would get. So then there was kind of that disconnect there. But then he was always doing his babbling, his amazing babbling. You know how it goes. Fantastic. Love that. Oh my goodness. I wonder how you would even like voice direct that for his voice actor Marty Grabstein. Like how, okay, so do like babbling, like how would you even like explain that? But I remember my siblings and I loved all that babbling nonsense too. We would just kind of mimic it. It was so funny to us. Oh my gosh. And then what was great too was Courage. He would always do kind of like his charades in a way when he was trying to communicate that they were in danger, that there was something creeping around the house or some kind of threat to them. And then he would just turn into whatever monster it was and stuff like that. But really, though, in season 1, when he just would say stuff, because then that was really only in season 1, when he would say stuff like, "Oh, I just know something bad is going to happen." And then also he would do a recurring thing was him saying something like, "Something weird is going on here. My name is Shirley," and it's not. Another one was, like, oh, something funny's going on, or my name is Ivana, and it's not. Ivana, that's a random name that came up here and there. I wonder why. But so he did a few of those kinds of, that kind of dialogue here and there. And then, of course, with all the screaming, then he'd scream at the top of his lungs, and you'd see his teeth and that one tooth with the hole in it. It's so strange. I could just imagine for the voice actor, Marty Grabstein, how that must have been so strenuous on his vocal cords. Oh my gosh. And also, the music in this show is absolutely phenomenal. The composers are Judy Gray and Andy Ezrin. You got the horror music in there, and just that piano music when there were sad moments. Absolutely fantastic music. And something else I love with the music too, when Courage would spring into action and then that music would kick in, apparently it's called Crisis Theme, but that music with the bongos is just fantastic. I love that music cue. It's just, I love that whole theme, and just stuff is going down and Courage has to go save Muriel. It's just fantastic. I love it. And one of the little songs I loved as a kid too was for that villain Katz. You remember him. He's actually the first villain in the series that we meet in the episode Cat's Motel. A Night at the Cat's Motel. And he is really sadistic. Oh my gosh. When they just go to that motel and then he's basically going to feed the guests to his giant spiders that he has. And something else I really love about this show, I really admire it, is that it's so consistent from episode 1 to the last episode of the series. It's consistent in terms of the characters, the writing, the animation, like the art style is consistent throughout every episode. What's also interesting though with the villains is that not all of them actually are evil. They may seem a threat, but then it turns out that they're actually lonely or misunderstood or running from danger themselves. There's the episode The Shadow of Courage, where that guy just dies, so then his shadow is just on its own and wreaks havoc in the house, but then, so Courage thinks it's a threat, and he's trying to warn Eustace and Muriel. And this was one where he spoke more, so then he'd be still communicating, though, with his turning into monsters and things, though, but then when he ran through the door and then Eustace is like, did you break that door? He's like, oh, forget the door, and he pulls on his ears a lot, like when he gets frustrated. He's so adorable, Courage. Oh my gosh. And Courage, by the way, apparently is a beagle. I didn't realize that, but he's a beagle. A pink beagle, because of course. But so that episode, The Shadow of Courage, and that episode also, by the way, that reminds me, that's when we first meet the computer. I love that character, voiced by Simon Preble, and oh my god, just his absolute sarcasm. Oh my god. When Courage is always just typing away, like, you hear, like, and you see, like, the words pop up too when he types, you see ticka, ticka, ticka. So that's too more with the slapstick, just when words pop up with the sound effects and stuff here and there. But when the computer's always like, you twit. Oh my gosh. When he wants to know about the evil shadow. And then the computer says, oh, an evil shadow, I wouldn't want them in my house. Just the computer that sits up in the attic and is sentient, and it's just so great. But then when Courage goes down to the basement, and the first time when he says the things I do for love, and then he's just being like an armchair psychologist for the shadow. And to mention voice actors, though, again, I just learned this too, that the voice of Nowhere Newsman, just the newsman that you hear at the intro for the show, he's voiced by the series creator, John R. Dilworth, so that's really cool. There's the episode Cajun Granny Stew, which is the second segment for the first episode. That one has much more slapstick in it, with that Cajun fox that wants to make Granny stew. And Eustace isn't in that episode, but there's just a lot of the cartoon antics, like with dynamite and then Muriel walking across the plain, and the fox just wants to use her to make stew. Then there's the LaQuack character, where we first meet him in Dr. LeQuack, amnesia specialist, when Muriel gets amnesia when Eustace is hammering on the roof, and then she's saying, Eustace, you'll wake the neighbors, and he's saying, we don't got any neighbors. And then she gets amnesia, and the LeQuack guy's gonna, rob them. And Eustace is saying how your job is to cook, clean, do laundry, do anything else I can think of. Oh my gosh. See, he's just so cold and selfish. And you have to imagine, though, that there was something once kind about him, that since Muriel loves him, but he maybe evolved as he grew older into this truly grumpy, mean old man, because he is a farmer, though, but he's never actually grown anything since they just live, on that desert, really. So that plays into his anger and the fact that he's jealous of Courage, so then he's awful to him. I can't stand that. But Muriel never tolerates it, though. She always hits him over the head with the rolling pin when he does that, and he's like, oh, what'd I do? When he scares poor Courage. You would think, though, Courage would kind of, every time he scares him every single time with that mask, you'd think Courage would develop an immunity to it, but nope. Poor Courage. And yet he always does the right thing no matter what, and he always saves Eustace, too, whenever he's in trouble. And really, one of the only times we see a selfless act from Eustace is that episode from season 2, The Curse of Shirley. She's first introduced, though, in the season 1 episode, Shirley the Medium. And that episode's just so funny, though, when Eustace trying to contact his dead brother Horst, because he found that box and he wants to know where the key is, because motivated by greed, of course, that he knows that there's money in there, so that's all he cares about. And then it's funny when she's calling the dead, though, and she just opens her mouth she's making, and then you just hear her phone ringing, she's making a phone call literally to the dead. But then in the other episode, when she puts a curse on Eustace because Muriel and Courage were kind to her, offering what they had, Muriel gives her, she pulls all that stuff out of her purse, here's some money for you, and you must be hungry. It's oh, and I'll be great with some tea. She just pulls that all out of her purse. And then when Courage pulls out his gold tooth, oh my gosh, and then he's licking the nerve ending of the tooth. Ugh. But then when Eustace slams a door in her face, so then she puts a curse on him, and then it's just the rain cloud over his head the whole time. Then he's sprouting mushrooms, and Muriel is putting together his birthday party, and he's up on the roof. And then I love when Shirley, though, when she says, the stupid one. He's stupid, right? And that to break the curse, he has to do something kind. And then when Courage holds up the mirror, and then when it breaks, and then since he lost his glasses, then he envisions himself as a young boy, and he's saying, it's so hot, my head is burning. And he's saying, where's your hat? I don't have one. Oh, poor fella, he needs a hat. And he puts the hat on him. Finally, something kind. Then the rain cloud goes away. And it's just Courage, though, with the hat. It's just adorable, the hat on his head. And then when he's mean again, and at the end, Eustace, and then the cloud comes back. So he's mostly not going to change, of course. But then there's also, in season 1, when we meet his mom in the Mother's Day episode, they just call her Ma. Ma Beg, voiced by Billy Lou Watt. And she calls him a stupid boy. So there's that cycle of abuse, and it's really terrible. But she just loves Courage. And then Eustace offers her the candy, flowers, all the stuff he brought for her for Mother's Day. And then the mirror. And she's like, how about a photo? And she just picks up Courage. And then at the end, though, when her wig falls off, and then she's crying hysterically, she's like, oh, I'm ugly. How could you love a mother who's ugly? And then he's saying, oh, Ma, and he takes off his hat. You always looked good to me. That was a sweet moment. And she's like, oh, you're the ugliest boy I've ever seen. And they're laughing, and they're, petting each other's bald heads. And when he's genuinely smiling, since he rarely smiles, he's always so grumpy. But that's a nice moment, though. But for the most part, he's just grumpy, always with his hands in fists, always muttering angrily. And when he always says, get away from me, to Courage. Terrible, though. And then another villain, when the episode came up, I was like, oh god, not this guy. From season 1, Freaky Fred, who evidently is Muriel's nephew. which we don't know much about Muriel's family, really. We know about Eustace's more. We see his mom, and then we learn about his brother that died, and there's a picture of his dad at one point. Oh, by the way, that reminds me, I know that there's that picture that hangs in their living room, that people, like, there's an internet theory that it's a picture of their son or something, Muriel and Eustace, but I don't think that's true. That's never been confirmed anyway, but I believe it's just kind of like a signature picture for John R. Dilworth. That's supposed to just be a picture of him, kind of like a caricature type photo, because it pops up here and there in other spots, but just that random picture of that random guy. Freaky Fred, though. I mean, with that, I remembered that perfectly, but then I didn't remember his whole narration when he just keeps saying how he's naughty, and I shuddered at that. I was like, oh god. And then, of course, I didn't realize as a kid, but watching it now, that it's a parody of Sweeney Todd. Like, he's just that evil barber, but then when he's shaving off Courage's hair, or his fur, terrible. But I remember those images of when he was talking about his pet gerbil or whatever it was, hamster, the little ball of fluff, that purple hamster with the eyes, and then talking about that woman, and then he shaved off her hair. Oh gosh, so creepy. And similarly, Night of the Weremole, how that is a parody of The Exorcist, when just that mattress is possessed, and then Muriel's possessed. Oh my gosh. And it's interesting, though, when Eustace and that woman, he says, like, oh, she likes you, go see if she's okay. So he knows that deep down that she likes Courage best, because, I mean, just could be nicer, but that's the whole point, obviously. You got the mean one and the nice one. You got that contrast. And then I remember the episode The Duck Brothers, where that's too, where they seem like villains, but actually it turns out that they just want to save their brother. And then that one, I remembered it perfectly when they're arguing, and it's hilarious that it's just the same exact voice, no different inflection whatsoever, the exact same voice, talking back and forth to itself with the two Duck Brothers, the purple and green little antenna things that they have. And then when they use Muriel because they're trying to break in to that restaurant to save their brother. And then they get Eustace, and they're controlling them. It's like they're rock'em sock'em robots hitting each other. When Courage is controlling Muriel then, and then they're controlling Eustace. But at the end, when they're arguing, and them when they're saying, going back and forth, it's like, oh, you keep laying eggs? Stop talking about my eggs? Like, that's stupid. And it's oddly, it just seems like, watching it now, to me, it seems like parody or an impression of John Lennon. Like, it just reminded me of the Beatles. It's like, why do they have that accent, the Duck Brothers? But then when they save their brother, and it's like, oh, I'm so happy I could just each lay a golden egg. And another one I remembered immediately, King Ramses' Curse, because how can you not remember that? I shuddered at that too, with that Ramses guy when Courage finds that slab with the plagues on it. And then that character is like, because once in a while with this show they'd have CGI, so that character is CGI'd. And then I remembered it immediately. Return the slab or suffer my curse. And I shuddered. I was like, ooh, that's still creepy to me to this day. But then Eustace with his greed, and then getting all those curses, and he just doesn't care because he wants to make money off of that slab. And then The Hunchback of Nowhere, I like that episode too. I remember that one as a kid too, because I remember that it stood out to me as a kid when, first off, it's with that hunchback character and everyone keeps turning him away because he's ugly. It's so mean. He's just a nice guy. He just needs a place to stay overnight, and they're just so cruel to him. But then when he bonds with Courage and they're ringing those bells. And then I remember, though, that it stood out to me as a kid when Eustace says Courage, like the one and only time he actually calls him Courage. I remember that stood out to me as a kid. I was like, oh wow, he's not calling him stupid dog for once, finally. But still, of course, he's always such a jerk. He's like, oh, where's my raincoat? And then at the table, he's like, oh, you're ugly. And then Courage is writing things for him to say, and he's like, well, you are bald. And then when Muriel, of course, just being so nice, and it's like, oh, we have a guest, it's Courage's friend. It's just so cute. It's like, oh, it's nice Courage has a friend. And then when that hunchback character stands up for Courage, saying, how could you be so mean to this dog? What has he ever done to you? So when Courage shows him kindness, then he shows it to Courage in return, and they just bond, and it's just really sweet. And then he stands up to Eustace because, yeah, Eustace really needs, like, his comeuppance. Which he does get his comeuppance, though. Like, he's never rewarded for his greed, never actually really gets a win. But then it's just nice. Like, oh, I hope when the Hunchback character leaves, and he's saying, I hope I come across more people with such kindness. And I also liked as a kid the episode Little Muriel. My name is Muriel, I'm only 3.5 years old. And I remember her voice stood out to me because I recognized her voice. She's voiced by Kath Soucie. But she's just complaining. It's like that scene with the macaroni and cheese. I hate macaroni and cheese. Oh my gosh, I loved that. It's like, more macaroni. More cheese. Too much macaroni. It's over and over, and then she just slaps it in his face. And then after all that, it's so frustrating. And an episode that my brother loved so much as a kid for one specific moment, though. Well, one scene, really. The Revenge of the Chicken from Outer Space. When the chicken returns from the pilot, and now it wants its revenge because it's fried and it wants a head now. So it wants Courage's head, and it ends up with Eustace's head. But the scene when Courage is carrying Muriel, it's always so funny, too, how Courage just picks up Muriel like she's light as a feather and just goes running with her over his head. Sometimes when he picks up both when he picks up both Muriel and Eustace over his head. But anyway, that scene when he is walking across the clothesline, and it's like a tightrope, and he's walking across with Muriel, and the chicken is chasing him. That music, my brother would blast that at full volume, that music, oh my god. And I found the scene, so here it is.
Terrible dream. I think I'll have a cup of tea.
The things I do for love.
Oh, lovely.
So that would be blasted at full volume, so loud that the furniture in his room would shake. I'd be like, why? Like, why are you blasting? But it was like weird. Oh my god, it was just actually fun to watch it that way. Only with that, specifically, with that music creeping in. And then I mentioned it to my brother recently. I was like, do you remember when we used to watch Cuttage? And with that episode with the chicken, and then you would blast the music at full volume, and then all he said to me was, oh yeah, why did I used to do that? And I'm like, I don't know why you used to do that. You just loved it, I guess. That horror, like, oh my gosh, of the chicken wanting his revenge. It's just so funny, the random things that you love as a kid, and then as an adult, it's just a newfound appreciation for it. But certain things that I appreciate now as an adult, the backgrounds in this show are absolutely gorgeous. The detail of it, specifically with the skies, absolutely beautiful scenery there. Like with the reddish oranges and the orangey reds with the sky, or the deep purples, the greens, like with the sunsets, or with the night skies, with the giant moon glowing. Absolutely gorgeous, gorgeous backgrounds in this show. Props to the artists and animators and background designers and painters. Incredible. Another episode that would creep me out as a kid, because really anything that was super hyper-realistic, that would really just creep me out against the 2D animation, because that would stand out all the more, obviously. That would just freak me out as a kid. But rewatching it now, you see the gentleness of it. The season 2 episode, The Magic Tree of Nowhere, just that mouth with the tree would creep me out. But then really, it's like the giving tree, just being so kind and selfless, and it grants their wishes. And then it's sad, though, when Eustace wants to chop down the tree because typical jealous Eustace, awful. But then it's sad when the tree sacrifices itself to cure Muriel, because when Eustace said he wished she had a bigger head to understand whatever, that he's the provider, so the tree has got to go. And then this one, it was the first once in season 2 when Courage didn't talk as much, so then he would just have his little thought bubble when he made his wish for the bulldozer thing, and she's like, oh, what fun, Courage, when they're just playing with the bulldozer, her and Courage. But the tree, it's so sweet, but yeah, that mouth creeped me out. But then at the end, when it's just growing again, the little bud growing. But that was a great screaming moment, in particular that episode, when the poor tree is knocked over, and then Courage runs all the way up on that rock, and he just screams, his mouth so wide, and the moon shatters. All of those screams were just so distinct in a way, and it's just funny when all the bizarre things with the screams, like when he screamed another episode and then you just see like his skeleton, like his fur flies off. And another funny one was when Muriel becomes invisible with that amulet thing in the episode Invisible Muriel, and then when she's turning invisible from that stone, that crystal thing, and then Courage takes out his eyes, dunks them in water. It's like, am I seeing this right? And then like he puts his eyes back in and then he screams. Another one, Courage in the Big Stinking City. That's another one where once I heard it, I remembered it so vividly, like just perfectly as if I was a kid again watching it, with that cockroach guy, Schwick. It's like, I'm from Bushwick, but my name is Schwick, just Schwick. It's like that you can call Bushwick. It's like, you see these bones? You want to know what made these bones? You don't want to know what made these bones. Oh my gosh. When they just go to New York City because Muriel's going to be performing for the Radio City Music Hall, which, wow, playing her little instrument. And it's just so cute. It's just so funny, though, when more often than not that she's oblivious to whatever danger they're in, and Courage just has to rescue her, and she doesn't realize that whatever character they're encountering is evil. And Eustace just doesn't care. Like with that character, when she's like, I got a TV, works for me. Like that's all he cares about. Motivated by money or food or TV. I guess that's about it with him. Mostly money, though. Mostly with his greed. Awful. And another one I remembered as a kid that I always loved, the eggplant episode. Like the great eggplant, when Courage is just trying to, when they want to get rid of Muriel, and then when Courage is saying, no, we don't want to get rid of her, it's the grocery store, like saying that they should be mad at the grocery store. And similarly, another food episode I loved as a kid, still love it now, the episode 1,000 Years of Courage from season 2 with those banana people. And I didn't remember, though, like, I didn't really remember what actually happened in the episode. I just remembered those banana people, and I just didn't remember the details of it. But it's funny at the beginning when they're playing bingo, and then Eustace, at one point, then he starts saying TV ratings. He's like, TV Y7, NC 17. And Muriel's like, oh, bingo, like what? But then when the earth spins and then Courage just, they're like under dirt and stuff, and he just digs his way up. And then it's all those banana people then. And then they have to fit in with the other banana people, so then that one banana sells them banana costumes. Like, oh, what do you got? And then Courage just pulls out all that stuff from his pockets, like he's got the accordion and a whale and anchor. It's so bizarre. But then when that great banana, and it's just got so weird, I'm like, wait a minute, is this like a cult or something? But then it turns out that great banana, it was actually a monkey. It's like, oh, it was my uncle, he put me up to it, that monkey that's going to eat them. You see all the banana peels. That's what's amazing too about this show, is just all the super high concept life or death situations that they're in. The truly absolutely maniacal villains and just weird characters. Another funny one, though, Robot Randy, which I remembered that one, but then something I didn't realize as a kid, when Robot Randy talks, that's funny that he sounds like it's an impression of Christopher Walken. So that was just really funny. It's like, and all he wants to do is whittle. It's like, well, I do make reindeer. Like, it sounds like him. Christopher Walken, you know, when people do the impression of him, you would think, I know, you know, the inflections. But then when they were breakdancing, it was just really funny. And it's just so sweet, though, with Courage. And another episode from season 1, that Bigfoot episode, because that's another one where it seems like it's a villain, but then it turns out that Bigfoot is just, it's like a kid, and he just, like, ran away from home, and then you see his mom, like, Theodore, it's like, what did I tell you about playing, like, leaving the house? But In that one, for instance, it's cute when he just wants a piece of pie, and at the very end he gets his pie. He always gets like his reward in a way. And really what's always cute though is that when he's just with Muriel and you just see that that's his happy place, that's when he's at his happiest, when, like, his true happiness, when Muriel's sitting in her rocking chair and Courage is sitting on her lap and she's rocking back and forth, and you just see he's just smiling. It's just so sweet and adorable. That's the greatest thing in the world to him. I just find that so adorable and precious. So, so sweet. And then another one that it's always funny when going back to watch something years and years later, when it feels like at first when I'm watching it and I think, oh wait, do I even know this episode? I don't think I've seen this one. And then all of a sudden an image then immediately brings me back, like, oh, I remember this perfectly. So in the episode Car Broke, Phone Yes, when that alien shows up and Muriel, of course, with her hospitality, and then I was like, I don't remember this at all, but then I remembered the image when that alien uses its tentacles, like, going up their nostrils to steal their qualities, and then he's checking things off his list, like cynicism, yes, kindness, and then looking at first at Eustace, no kindness there, and then of course he steals Muriel's kindness. So I remembered that image I was like, oh no, I remember this now. But then when she's acting like Eustace, and she's like, oh, stupid dog, stupid husband, and cook us dinner, and then, oh goodness, so out of character. And then when, of course, Courage has to save her, make her go back to normal, and retrieve her kindness. It's just weird that it's just a fluid, and then you just, like, put it back in through your nose. That's just so strange. Such fascinating concepts. So some really just, again, consistent writing. And the head writer for this series was David Stephen Cohen. And then John R. Dilworth directed all the episodes himself. What's also funny in this show that I liked as a kid too, how all the props are just comically disproportioned and, like, comically large. Like with that remote control with the big button, just stuff like that. Or like giant scissors. Just interesting too, like the perspective in this series. And it's just great that Courage always wins. Courage the character, and Courage, that quality. And there are only 2 half-hour episodes in this series. There's the season 2 episode, The Tower of Dr. I don't know how to pronounce it now, Jalost, I think it was. With that guy taking everyone else's happiness, because if he can't be happy, no one can. So then when poor Muriel is just a shell of her usual cheerful, happy, friendly self, and she's just all like, ooh, like all lethargic, like, ooh. And of course doesn't affect Eustace, because he's just always grumpy and terrible and awful. But with that villain in particular, it's just good to see how, even though they're evil, that, like, with this villain, he's just kind of lonely too. Like, he's like, oh, rats, come give me a hug. That always helps calm me. So it's nice seeing those moments of humanity. Even with Eustace too, because you really don't see that often. Very rarely you see him showing any signs of affection whatsoever towards Muriel. But in that episode, McPherson Phantom, when Eustace thinks that Muriel is doing all this awful stuff to him, but then it turns out it's that Phantom, and then also it's Ma Bag wanting to break apart their marriage, and then Ma saying, oh, I'm a licensed therapist, and then Courage has to get his therapy license, and then of course with the computer. That's so funny too. It's like, okay, to get your license for therapy, you just have to answer these questions, and then one of them is like, if Jimmy has 3 apples and Jeff has 5, why don't they just eat and shut up? So stupid. And then he just answers the questions, like, oh, congratulations, you're now a fully licensed therapist. And it's so cute when he's hopping up and down Courage. It's just so adorable, but when he's excited. But then when he does the couples therapy for Eustace and Muriel, and then it's just a rare moment of them hugging and, like, Eustace smiling, and it's like, oh, Dr. Courage, you just worked wonders, like, to help their marriage. And then he's like, okay, Muriel, I forgive you, I'll give you another chance. Because for the most part, it's just him, like, big deal and whatever, and then just, Muriel, where's me dinner? That's all he cares about. Gosh. So then once in a while, it's nice to see those nice moments, because they are a married couple, so And really just the moments, to me, just that makes Eustace sympathetic are with his mother. There's the episode also, Bad Hair Day. I remember that one too as a kid, just all the hair growing. But when they take Muriel because she has the rare blood type ABCXYZ, whatever it is. And then when they go there, Eustace and Courage, and then because he just wants his dinner, of course. But then when he's like, Ma, you work here? It's like, oh yeah, of course I work here. It's like, you never told me that. You never told me anything. So that's sad too. And even when they were doing their therapy session, when he's like, it all started with me, Ma. She never liked me. That's sad. That really is. But then, I mean, God, you don't have to take it out on Courage. Just be nice to Courage. It's so terrible. I know that's part of the conflict of the series, but it's just so terrible. You would think just once. But then I guess that's just the way his character is. I get it. But thank goodness for Muriel, though. Always so sweet, and with her cooking, just so cute. Because even in that Tower of Dr. Jalost episode, when she's making her happy plums, so that's what cures them. Like, oh, my plums can make anyone happy. So then when that guy is eating them, the Dr. Jalost guy, and then he's like, oh, these plums, and that's what makes him happy then, since he was always so miserable. And then the other half-hour episode is from season 4, actually, called The Mask. And that's one I did remember as a kid. I did remember it, but not the full context of it. And that one, too, is just the one moment with Eustace and Muriel, like Eustace in particular, just being nice to Muriel. But, I mean, it's just always so, for the most part, just so fleeting. But when the character Kitty shows up and she's wearing the mask, and then she's saying, like, you have to face reality. Well, you don't face reality, that you always sneak sweets to Muriel, and that you say you fix things, but you don't, to Eustace. When Muriel's saying, oh, she was right, and then later when Muriel's saying, I'm sorry, Eustace, I shouldn't have said what I said. He's saying, oh, it's okay, Muriel, no one's perfect. So again, a rare moment of tenderness from Eustace. But not really. I mean, kind of grasping at straws here, but again, he'll never learn, but he gets his comeuppance, though. Even also that episode with the golden hat, and then he just turns to dust or whatever. Or when he just becomes a statue, just all that stuff. But it's just funny when episodes just end in that way, and it's like, well, I guess obviously things just reset then the next episode. Like in that episode from season 1, Hothead, when he goes to that clinic, Eustace, to get that hair growing serum, and then the side effects of those, after you get angry, it makes you blow up, literally. And then when he gets the one strand of hair, but then it just wilts, then everything making him angry, just trying to open the can of dog food or trying to fix the squeaky chair. And then when the house blows up, and then, like, that's it, he's just gone, I guess, from that episode. But then Muriel's just sitting there with Courage in the rocking chair again, and she just says, Courage, remind me to tell Eustace whenever that man gets back to fix this chair. So episode that just ends with Eustace getting destroyed, basically, but then somehow he's perfectly okay the next episode. Even that episode when they turn to marionettes at the end, also in season 1, the Great Fusilli, and then when they're marionettes, and then Courage is just being the puppeteer for them. So that's strange, too, how that one ended. And then that episode, the Fusilli guy, he's voiced by Jim Cummings, by the way. He's like, oh, it's a phantom. I didn't realize that as a kid, but I really noticed it now, recognized his voice. So it's just all strange. But that episode, The Mask, when Kitty says, when she's just beating up Courage, though, which I hate that too, oh my God, that made me so angry. But then she's taking out her anger on Courage, thinking all dogs are evil, terrible. And then when she talks about her best friend Bunny, and she's with that mean boyfriend of hers that's a dog, and that he's abusive towards her. And then we see that she has that little mouse toy, like, to Kitty love Bunny. So then Courage goes to save Bunny. And then when they reunite at the end, and they just sing, oh, we'll be best friends forever. And it's just, I got a little choked up unexpectedly. It was really sweet. And then Kitty, like, they were thanking him. Bunny was saying, oh, that dog saved my life. And then Kitty saying, I was wrong, not all dogs are bad. That was just really, really sweet. So that was certainly a darker one. And then just so many of the villains, they were recurring villains, like Cats being the first one to return with Cat's Island and then Cat's Candy. The Cat's Island one is funny, though, when Eustace is like, nope, not getting out of this chair. And then when they go on the cruise, and then he's still in the chair, and then when he just goes flying away, he's like, nope, still not getting out of this chair. And no, sir, not like, oh my god, that's hilarious. He's so stubborn. But then there's that episode when Eustace wants to get his revenge on Courage because he has the last straw when Muriel gives Courage that blanket that she made. Like, calm down, Eustace, you're such a jerk, gosh. But then when he has all those villains come back, and you see that Fox character and Cats and a few other villains look whack again. And this is an episode that I didn't remember, though, and I was thinking to myself, I might have seen it, but I don't know. But then when Muriel was saying how, like, asking him, oh, what can you do better than anyone? And then he thinks, I'm like, oh, what's he gonna do? And then he just starts screaming at the top of his lungs. I'm like, oh, of course, that's the best thing. No one beats him at that. Like, the loudest, longest scream of sheer terror and fright. Also in season 4, we see Son of the Chicken from Outer Space. So then the chicken again now it's his son getting revenge. And they just have 3 heads. So I guess it's 3 sons, the one body. But the mom wants them to avenge the dad, the space chicken. And Last of the Star Makers was the first episode in that 2-episode segment. But I didn't remember that episode. And it was just these squids, the squid family, and then the husband, I guess, gets eaten, and then the squid mother with her little eggs that aren't born yet, and then they make stars, apparently, the squids. What a fascinating, interesting, bizarre concept. Another really cool concept, though, was when they go into the paintings. That was in season 3. It's called So in Lover Are We Two, and you see all of these paintings in the art gallery, all of classic, famous paintings, the Mona Lisa, and that Scream painting. But then it's cool concept when the planets align and the paintings come to life. So then the Mona Lisa is with the thinker, that statue, and he just has to, it's like, oh, I don't know, like, when she just wants to be with him and he's unsure, and they're going into all these different paintings. So then Courage has to kind of play matchmaker because then Muriel was in the Mona Lisa paintings, and there would have been stuck then if he didn't get them out in time. And Courage, that reminds me, he never really had a love interest. I mean, I guess that wouldn't really work in this show, since his love is for Muriel, and by extension Eustace, for his owners. Eustace is awful. I can't say that enough. Eustace is awful. Anyone that's cruel to animals, that's absolutely god-awful. But that would have been interesting if Courage had some sort of love interest, but then I'm sure, of course, there would have been some sort of catch. Like, maybe it belongs to some, like, it was a lost dog or something, say, or it was a ghost the whole time, or it belonged to some girl that lives in a painting, something like that. I could see something just super bizarre. Or maybe it's like really an alien trying to trick him. Oh, but that would be sad though if it wasn't really genuine. Or maybe if it is genuine, but then maybe it's out on the run or something, from running from the law. So many possibilities. Just thinking of a potential character like that. But that would have been really cute. And really though, with Courage's parents, I mean, that episode made me unexpectedly emotional too. Another episode that I saw maybe only once, a long time ago, maybe when it first aired possibly, but the final episode of the series, in fact, Remembrance of Courage Past, when we see the backstory about Courage's parents with that evil veterinarian that just sent them up into space. And so sad with poor Courage as a baby crying, and then when Muriel finds him though, and she says, like, oh, you're all alone here, what courage you have, you want to come live with me? And just so sweet, and I got emotional. It was really adorable. It's an absolutely really well-written, well-crafted series, even with all the horror elements, that at the core of it all is just Courage's love for Muriel, facing all of his fears, all of the crazy things that happen to them, all of the insanity. And what's funny is that somehow this reminds me of back in the day, back when this show was airing in the early 2000s in particular, of, if you recall Cartoon Fridays. If you don't recall that, maybe this will jog your memory.
Is that it? No, that is not it.
So that was a Cartoon Network program block on Friday nights, and it was just, if you don't recall this, that it was just a different Cartoon Network character would host each week. This was just little, whatever you want to call them, wraparounds or interstitials or bumpers, just kind of the character introducing the show. But I loved that as a kid, just the cartoon characters interacting with the audience. So there was several times with just different characters hosting, like Dexter from Dexter's Laboratory, I couldn't help it, from Dexter's Laboratory, or Bubbles from the Powerpuff Girls, and Eustace apparently hosted. Then there was one with some kind of programming, scheduling error or something, and then first it was Blossom, and then Mojo showed up, and then Courage, and then, like, just with the characters interacting with each other from other shows, I got a kick out of that as a kid. I always found that so cool. But then when Mojo's saying, like, oh, you're hosting, you don't even talk. I talk sometimes, Courage. Which, that's true, I talk sometimes. So that was just a fun trip down nostalgia lane. And then there was, in fact, a few years ago, a little revival episode of this series titled The Fog of Courage, but it never actually aired in the US, apparently. You can find it on YouTube, though, and it was just a one-off special, and for some reason it's in CGI, and apparently it wasn't actually complete or something, I'm not sure, but still with Muriel and Courage, and he was digging in the dirt, as he always does, and he finds out necklace, and then the fog is after it, but Eustace, of course, wants to sell it, and the fog apparently was voiced also by John R. Dilworth. Then still with the classic gags, Courage screaming, and all of his heads. But I don't know, it doesn't really work too well in CGI, in my opinion. That reminds me, too, though, that at the end of each episode, with Season 1, it was Courage holding up the sign with the spray painted the end. And then it was him taking a bow in Season 2. And you just see a little, like, the picture of him, and then Eustace and Muriel on the sides, small. And then Seasons 3 and 4 was the CGI Courage taking a bow. And then there is apparently a prequel series in the works, and it's going to be titled Before Courage. So I guess Courage's family, possibly? So that would have been interesting too, though, to see, since we learn in that episode with Courage that his parents are up in space, since then the veterinarian ends up in space too. So maybe at some point he could reunite with them. But if this is a prequel series, then obviously it's before Courage was born. So I don't know. That's all interesting. But this is just a really great show, really fun to rewatch now all these years later. It's definitely like a top 3 favorite Cartoon Network show for me. Because again, loved it as a kid, even though certain things would creep me out. Oh my god, that reminds me, I have to say, before I wrap this up, not to end it on this note, but I totally forgot. How could I forget? The creepiest villain to me as a kid was in the Season 2 episode, The House of Discontent, with that super creepy, because again, as I said, I hated the realistic looking villains, so it's just like a floating head, it's a skull, whatever the heck it is. I have no idea, but even saying it now I'm creeped out, but oh my gosh, but it was whatever it's supposed to be, the spirit of that, I forget now, but when that flower that died, and then it wants them to leave because Eustace can't grow anything, so it teaches them to respect life, like teaches Eustace. So then it's nice in the end, though, when Eustace actually grows something, when they're first melting, like they're gonna die, Muriel and Eustace, in the basement, but then when Courage digs up the flower and then puts it by Eustace, and then with him sweating, and then the flower grows. But yeah, that villain creeped me out so much as a kid. Oh my goodness. But rewatching it, I was like, okay, I can handle this, I think. I don't know. Goodness, that creeped me out. I can't believe I almost forgot that. I had to mention that. That was the creepiest to me. Oh my gosh. I can't believe I almost forgot this too. Another thing my siblings and I loved as a kid was that one random guy, when he would just go like, "Watch where you're going, you fool," that stupid guy that would just show up here and there. But he's in the episode Courage the Fly, when he turns Courage into a fly, and he's like, "Oh, it's supposed to be Buffalo." So bizarre and random. But then when Courage is a fly buzzing around, and then he used to sing, "I'm gonna get me mallet," and then when Courage at one point is hitting into the light bulb of the lamp, and he just says, "I don't know why I'm doing this, but I like it." All the little asides to the audience that he'd have here and there, especially in the first season, but got a kick out of that too. So all the humor, all of the super dark, bizarre yet fascinating concepts. Also that Loch Ness monster, Carmen, and then she's just singing, like she's just an opera singer, like singing Carmen, the opera. That's fascinating too. So much great stuff in this show that I loved as a kid and I appreciate all the more now as an adult. So it would be cool to see more of Courage, just more stories to explore, but who knows, we'll see with this prequel series. But just remember to always have courage, because the things I do for love. And with that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com, or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, I just don't see how a world that makes such wonderful things could be bad. I'll be discussing The Little Mermaid. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.